All right, welcome back to a very special episode of Breakneck, a podcast where we examine technology and the near future from the perspective of people building products. And today, Ian and I are going to be talking about a doomsday document, the AI in 2027. Now, this is a report that was generated by Scott Aronson and some super forecasters. And it was featured in the New York Times. It was a big thing a week or two ago. Hey, 2027 AI is going to take over the whole planet, and it could go well or it could go really poorly, but with an emphasis on it's probably going to go really poorly. And these are people who believe that there's a probability that we are doomed. That's something like 80%. And so, Ian, I'm excited to hear what you think about the doc. I know that it was a convincing document relative to things I've seen, but I, of course, a skeptic, and I poke holes in things is a natural reflexive activity. So, I think my opinion is things could go poorly, and things have happened, but let's really examine their assumptions.
Yeah. So for folks listening in, you and I have not synchronized on this at all, other than just chatting for 30 seconds beforehand on this topic and realizing we need to start recording.
No, it started to get
interesting. Good conversation.
Hit play. let's record.
Yeah, so we kind of sat on this for a couple of weeks because it's lengthy. It's quite rigorous, and look, I'm not an expert on how to create these types of forecasts, but it does seem pretty rigorous from the forecasting perspective, and the methodology seems pretty interesting. So if anybody wants to follow along, ai-2027.com. And for those who aren't looking at it, they present it as a website. There's a couple of different interviews on various podcasts out there at the moment, so you can listen to some of the context.
Yeah, I listened to the Dorkesh. And Dorkesh is probably my favorite podcast right now. It's very interesting. It's got good topics, and Dorkesh is like super smart. It's incredible to listen to a podcast that's entertaining. This is a podcast with smart people, but who knows if it's entertaining? That's up to our listeners. But Dorkesh consistently entertains me. And it's funny, you just spend years watching news shows and things like that. And to see somebody who's actually interested in science and knowledgeable enough to ask interesting questions. And I thought the Dorkesh interview with Daniel and Scott, who are two of the authors of this report, was worth listening if you're interested in this topic.
Yeah. So it warrants a sort of this isn't a 30-minute type of exercise, I don't think, to kind of scan this thing. I think it warrants going quite a bit deeper. And what it really does is almost month by month chart the trajectory from here out. Actually, it talks about 2027 being a pivotal year, but it talks beyond that.
Yeah.
So
something, yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty rigorous. I learned a lot of stuff reading it. It's presented really, really well. So it's interesting, Matt, you kind of presented it as a doomsday forecast.
That's certainly what got it. So there's a New York Times article on it, and that was certainly the thing I think that got everyone's attention. Just a quick background on the authors. Scott Alexander is a very popular blogger who had a blog called Slate Star Codex and Astral Codex 10 or whatever his new one. And so he's very well connected among various tech types, and I don't know his whole thing, but he's well liked. And then the other authors were super forecasters, and these are people who kind of go on these various forums and make predictions and then check them and then kind of have a more rigorous approach to forecasting. And I think, Ian, that's what you're seeing in the doc, is that they make testable predictions, and those testable predictions are backed up. And that's my favorite type of prediction. It's like, a lot of people say like, oh, AI is changing everything. It's like, that's not a testable hypothesis. It's saying like governments will do these things on these days. And like you said, it goes month by month. And so you can see that history of these people, that they have been engaged and have gained prominence through making testable predictions that have been accurate in the past. And I think one of the ways it was described on Dorkesh is that these guys basically in 2021 or 2022 or something, predicted what was going to happen up to today, almost with spooky accuracy. Now you have a lot of people making a lot of predictions, and then one of them happens to be correct, and then you elevate those people. You see it in the stock market all the time. It's like the guy who picked Bitcoin in 2012 and became a billionaire. It's like, okay, yeah, but there's a lot of people who made a lot of stupid decisions. We don't talk about them. And so is someone a great forecaster, or are they just lucky? I think that's what I like to discuss today because these guys have a great track record and they're predicting
Yeah.
pretty nasty stuff.
Yeah, and as I come into the conversation, I'm it's entertaining to have a conversation as to whether they're right or wrong. We know already that they are both right and wrong. We just don't know which parts are right and which parts are wrong. But it's fun to have a bit of structure around how things might evolve. And the first thing that really struck me is the primary driver is geopolitical rather than kind of market economics. And what I mean by that is it's US China versus OpenAI versus Claude versus DeepSeek.
Yeah, and if someone
Yeah.
hasn't read it yet, I think it's worth doing a quick gloss of the basic structure of the document. And the idea is that a few things, there's a few main points, is that we're sitting here and there's agents. And agents are defined as things that can go out and take action of their own accord. So you give them a goal, but then they can kind of take action. And that's very different than the AI of the past where you kind of have to prompt it and then you're going to get some result back. The idea is that LLMs with reinforcement learning kind of attain this ability to take action on their own. Now, the question is, how far in the future and how big a goal can you give these agents? And their basic assumption is this, is that agents are being trained right now on coding. And in some subtle, I don't understand what it's like to be a AI researcher in 2025. That's some like rarefied group of people. And the idea is that these agents are not only learning how to code, these AI agents, but they're also learning how to become really good AI researchers, which I'm assuming is some type of feedback mechanism where you run experiments, you see if this new thing improves some of your, is it producing better AI results? Is it using less resources? Is it running faster? There's some set of objective functions that they're optimizing against. And the idea is not only are these agents getting smarter, they're getting better at coding, they're getting better at AI research. And the core assumption of this whole document is that that feedback process where AI research gets easier to do as these agents get better, which therefore makes the agents better, which then reinforces so it's like the agents are getting better at researching themselves, which makes the agents even better, which makes it even easier for them to make progress. And you get a runaway breakdown, like a nuclear chain reaction is that, one agent produces more intelligence that it took in, and then you have this, it gets easier the next step and it just runs away. And so you get this runaway explosion in agent creativity and agent development speed. And then the second one is what you described is it becomes apparent that because it is going to become a runaway process, that either China gets it and the AI becomes aligned with China's goals, which are to support an authoritarian, centralized committee in charge of a massive, economy, or does it get aligned with the United States and our desire, and it's going to power AI drones and tanks and missiles and all this stuff. And so whoever gets it first is just the ultimate winner forever, like the Cold War. It's like whoever has the first strike. And so the end of the document, kind of as you get towards 2027, and which is the name of the document, so that's the pivotal year, is essentially the government of the United States chooses to just go as fast as possible and be the winner without regard for whether it's a good idea or it's going to support our values or things like that. Winning becomes more important than making sure the AI align. And I think that then the end of the document, I don't want to spoil it for you, so you can pause right now or skip 10 seconds ahead, is that the AI kills everybody for some unknown reason because it ran out of space or something. It was the reasoning they gave, and everybody's killed, and the AI just kind of goes off on and does its own thing. And so it's really, I think that it feels polemical in that sense that they were really driving towards, hey, we need to focus on alignment and invest more on alignment and making sure these AIs don't become evil, rather than a real prediction. That was my general feeling on the document. How did you feel within that structure? What did I miss?
You described it very well. I think the post 2027 stuff it's just too far away, and there's hints of rationality in there. So I was probably more interested in the run up between now and 2027, and the rate of change is that they forecast remains extremely high, and that's, I don't want to necessarily, I'm not looking at this to kind of find fault, but actually I'm trying to believe it or not. And that's one area that I struggle to believe in. Like if we just look at ChatGPT 4.1, And the latest round of LLMs, the advancement hasn't been enormous.
Yeah. That was my biggest one. So I had three major points of contention on this, and I think the first one in order of the document is exactly
Yeah.
what you brought up, which is they imagine that there's infinite returns to intelligence, is the way that a lot of people talk about that, which means that as you get more intelligent, there continues to be a return on your investment in that intelligence that exceeds the cost of developing that intelligence, right? And um, in business, this happens all the time. And some company makes a gigantic breakthrough, but then it's quickly commoditized. For instance, the GLP-1 drugs right now. Novo Nordisk developed Ozempic. And if I get the wrong companies, I don't really care the names of the companies. And then Eli Lilly or one of them in the United States has developed Retrutride or something like that, which is far more effective. And so even though, they developed the perfect drug, Ozempic is like in all these ways, like solves a huge problem. They didn't develop an economic system where they were able to incrementally invest in that advantage in a way that sustained the company. So that's an example of a company goes up, and the whole Danish economy got distorted because it was like half the Danish stock market. And then now it's coming down as people realize that there'll be other drugs controlled by other companies that will be competitive. That's return on invested capital. And you need a consistent set of investment opportunities that only accrue to the leader. Now, a counterexample of the GLP-1 drugs is Google. Google became the leader in search, and there was about 5 orders of magnitude of increased scale advantage and economic returns to being the leader on organizing the world's data. Right? And so you saw Google go from worth $1 million or less in 1998 up to several trillion now. And so there's just these huge, how many orders of magnitude is that? At least 6, right? Huge return on investment. And so at each step, being the leader in search led them to have an additional advantages. They invested in more compute, and that allowed them to continue to scale in an economically viable way. 6 orders of magnitude is enormous, right? It's like 1 million times bigger. And like you said, not only are we seeing slowdowns in the rate of growth, in terms of LLM quality and stuff like that, but it's a huge assumption to say, hey, the AI is going to get 1,000 times better, let alone 1 million times better. And those are really that Google-like explosive growth, where there continued to be returns to the most intelligent agent for 5 or 6 orders of magnitude. It's an enormous assumption, and you don't see it very often. Like Eli Lilly.
Well, yeah, you don't, but it has happened. That's what's happened in the last couple of years. I think there's been an order of magnitude increase in effective commute, a little bit less than every 12 months for the last couple of years. So, but even just to take that, assuming the same rate of advancement, then straight away we can look at 2027 and say that's not going to happen. It's probably going to be 3 to 4 years before that's going to happen, assuming the same rate of advancement.
I think not only do they assume that the advancements will continue, they assume it'll be economically viable, but then they also assume that it will actually speed up. And you look at the gains to technology. I think the aerospace industry is a great example. You went from the Wright Flyer in like 1910 or 1908, whenever that was, right? And then within 40 years, 50 years, you had jet engines. And everyone's like, oh my goodness, you have 2001 Space Odyssey comes out in 1969, and they assume we're going to take a jet to space and the moon, and it just stalled. And actually the B-52 Stratobomber is going to be in use for 100 years. We talked about that last week. It's like, things just freeze into place. And essentially the state of the art in the 1950s is so similar to the state of the art now after this explosive change in the aerospace industry during World War II, where it really got adopted and scaled up. And then the economic conditions for investment, but also just the realities of the physical process of flying. Breaking the sound barrier is extraordinarily expensive. It really limits the utility of flying. Hypersonic flight, your plane starts to melt. You can't navigate because there's this giant plasma of field around you, right? Everyone just assumed, we could just go faster, higher, better. No, physically there was no point to it anymore. And so the economic conditions of continued returns to capital for additional investment broke down. And you have investments and improvements, but they've been mostly involved in efficiency and things like that. And we could have easily imagined a similar situation for AI, that it doesn't get necessarily better, it just gets cheaper, more reliable. It becomes like a tool that fits in our toolbox, but it doesn't become this breakaway super intelligence that everyone's predicting. And there's
Yeah.
no real way to reason a priori that they've demonstrated in this thing that would say, hey, no, there's got to be six orders of magnitude additional returns
Yeah.
to capital.
And let's not forget, when we say AI, we're really talking about LLMs right now. LLMs are a very rudimentary tool. It's a mastery of spoken language, which we're doing all sorts of manipulations right now to harness those in a way that can be presented in a consistent way to businesses. So that's one thing. The other, last week we talked about creativity, and that was the other thing that struck me about this whole thing. The core assumption is they develop this researcher that actually is extremely efficient, and you research to find something new and novel, which is creativity. We haven't seen anything really particularly new or novel come out of LLMs that I'm aware of, and we had a whole conversation last week about it. So that's a key requirement for this whole thing to happen. So
Yeah. And I think the kind of naive assumption, and I say naive because they didn't present compelling evidence in this document. They might have it, but in this document, if you go and read it, I did not see at any point any kind of real justification why there are many orders of magnitude of improvement that are going to be physically possible. Like you said, it's a mastery of language. Well, what if we have just reached the threshold? And this is a common critique, is that we've ingested all the world's data. And so you get this huge improvement, and then all the world's data is ingested, and now you're going to be relying on synthetic data or experiential data, but that improvement rate now might have a huge kink in it and is now much slower. You were in the drone industry and you saw it up close, but I think there was this huge explosion in drone capability, which came from things like MEMS accelerometers, which were developed for cell phones. And so when they were when all of the cell phone components, and this is my opinion on the drone industry, you're much more informed, but like were put into this new form factor, it seemed like drones got incredibly capable, like almost instantly. And you imagine this future where they're going to be doing all these incredible things, but there was a kink because actually what you're doing is appropriating an existing technology into a new format. It was not an organic generation of new technology in this new format. It was just an appropriation. And if you appropriate all the data on the internet and the concept of language in general, and you are able to map the order, it's an appropriation of technology. It's not this thing that you can map out as this exponential that will continue.
yeah, there's a guy called people probably heard of him, called Jan LeCun from Meta. He's kind of one of the godfathers of AI, and he's very much on the side of, hey, LLMs are interesting, but to really make breakthroughs, we need something else, and there's a new paradigm that needs to happen. So he's a pretty credible person with that stance. So I think you said there was three things that were on your mind that you wanted to. We missed
Yeah,
the third one.
the second one, I think we could segue from creativity, which is the idea of pluralism. And one of the big assumptions that happens in this is that all of the agents, at least on the American side, all work together and they're not competing for resources. It's just this, and it was kind of a shift. It goes from this hyper altruistic where they're either on the AI side and all the AIs work together in this completely altruistic way, even though they're all independent. Version 4 of this agent works with version 5 and they're all on the same team. And they talked about alignment and stuff like that, and how the AI gets the ability to align stuff earlier, so it all gets aligned with itself, and we can't tell. But the idea that like all of the AIs work together with each other in this perfectly kind of seamless way, and they're all against human beings. And I think what you would see emerge is agents are going to have competition for resources with other agents. If like this scenario, these agents are resource constrained, why aren't they competing with each other? And then also, why aren't human beings collaborating with agents independently? It's either agents are all working with each other, and then the president is working directly with it all assumes like these very hyper concentrated networks of influence where agents are all run by one intelligence and human beings are all represented by Donald Trump in this one, making deals with the agent or with the head of the 4 or 5 people in charge of OpenAI. and it's all the power becomes super concentrated. And like assuming that there will be intense returns on invested capital for research, assuming that you're going to have these very dense and connected networks of control rather than like maybe a power law of control with much more fatter tails of control and influence and
Yeah.
creativity was not justified, I don't think.
We're more likely to see that in China. Like, to me, it seemed more rational, this notion of concentrating the resources, in particular physical zones, putting those people together. You have a lot more control. If that happens in China, then the US is going to look at that and say, well, look, we probably need to do the same level of concentration. So that actually felt more plausible.
Yeah, I also felt it was like counter historical. In the United States, what we've seen is that there's a gigantic amount of open communication about these things. And so we've seen papers, and the assumption is that those open sharing of information was not critical to success in the future, that the AI just kind of like figured out on its own and it didn't need all these researchers. And that's maybe plausible if there's really 300,000 AI researchers that are all better than every single human researcher, and there's only 10,000 human researchers. Well, maybe you don't have any open communication in that sense. But also what we've seen is replication of roughly equivalent capabilities over and over again with not even 6 months of gap in between them. So all this relies on, one team is slightly ahead and that it's growing so fast that being 2 or 3 months behind is enough to be, we haven't seen that. Like, with DeepSeek, OpenAI put a huge amount of investment into their models, and then DeepSeek came out with one that was substantially cheaper. Those are the types of things that indicate to me that there would be a lot more likelihood of pluralism in the future, of having multiple independent sources of power that are interacting with each other as agents, but in the sense that like, hey, I have my interests, you have your interests, and we're going to mediate them in some kind of open forum. All of that was just assumed not to happen, and that power would become increasingly concentrated. And again, not to say it can't happen. I'm not good at predicting the future. Like, I'd be making stock bets, not doing a podcast. But like, it's something that wasn't motivated in this document.
Yeah, I mean, this, to think about it in a slide, or maybe use different language to describe it. There are so many different bottlenecks and so many little things that we have to do to make things work. It's not just about the LLM, right? You got to present that to the world in a way that, I was going to say, maybe not to the world, but present it to the consumer of that in a way that is usable. So if it were the government, it's a bunch of shit that needs to be done just to wrap it and present it and make it consumable. So that just, that's kind of, and a bunch of that stuff is happening at human speed, right? Mm-hmm. The LLM is just a little language model. All it knows is words, right? It doesn't have arms and legs right now.
It doesn't even have the concept of time in any kind of internal sense.
Right. So there's a bunch of stuff that
is just in there. I would say that, like, the reason I would consider this pluralism and this kind of like, I think it is fundamental to creativity. You look at like political parties, for instance, right? You see how they get captured by ideology and kind of like run off the rails. I think that's an essential, like an existential part of being, an independent intelligence, is that the only thing that pulls me back from kind of single-minded delusion, and I say me, I think everybody, is constantly having to deal with power in the real world that snaps you back, right? Like, left to your own devices, you become like Howard Hughes in a room going completely insane. Like, the lack of limits is a real impediment. And so I don't think pluralism emerges just randomly. I think pluralism and having agents checking agents and competing for resources and having to get political control over small groups of people, not just the whole country at once. Like, I think that's kind of foundational for the type of fast growth in capabilities. I don't have a real good justification for me, but if I had to bet, I would bet on lots of different independent people constantly having to have their ideas checked, not just by like, reality. I don't think truth is that compelling. I think it's power. Like, powerful people are competing against you. You have to convince them. And that's going to form a much stronger feedback mechanism than just like, can you build robots really fast? Anyway.
Yeah, and there's a huge amount of learning for those people to come to any, like, does our government today understand any of this? I don't think so. Not in any meaningful way.
Well, and okay, that will, I'll use my segment to the last one. So like the last assumption of this paper that I think is worth addressing is that basically the competition with China leads to basically the United States and all political and financial actors in the United States basically giving away complete control over almost everything to this AI. And I felt that this was like almost like this was the part that was kind of like, yeah, it just doesn't even feel well thought through. A lot of the earlier stuff felt pretty well thought through, motivated, but not proven. This is the part that just kind of fell apart for me, is that it's like, oh, Donald Trump will see the absolute necessity of things and make the logical answer. And not only him, but everybody else will as well. Donald Trump is a living refutation of this assumption. It's like, well, Donald Trump will see that doing something will cause the stock to crash, so he won't do it. It's like, no, he's doing it right now. He's doing something that makes no sense for no reason, in my opinion, makes no reason, has significant political costs, significant economic costs, because he wants to maintain control. And I think that's much more fundamental. And this whole paper assumes that the US, seeing that China might get, some advantages, will do everything to make the rational choice and give away all of their control to this AI. And I'm like, that doesn't match. I think that was the part where the whole assumption fell apart for me. And that was a critical piece for them to get the level of computing resources and control over machinery and stuff like that leads to doom.
So I think, just to zoom out a little bit, I think the sequence of events is plausible, but I think the timing is too aggressive. I don't think it's going to happen in what they're proposing in 2027. I think is much further out. And I think once you start pushing that out, I think it opens the window for this to be less of a geopolitical driver and more of a market driver. Meaning the technology starts, the government are looking and they're understanding, and they're beginning to understand the potential of it all, but you don't have the level of coordination that you just pointed out is unlikely to happen, the concentration of resources. So it plays out sort of in the real world, where people are like, oh, I used to do that, used to be my job, right? And now that, so I think that is actually the path that seems more realistic to me, that it's not a geopolitical kerfuffle. It is a kind of a market scenario, which this doesn't contemplate at all.
Yeah, and I think that's the real endpoint, is that they imagine, I think that's what's essential here, is that it happens so fast because there's incredible returns on invested capital that are basically uninhibited, and the faster you go, the faster you realize them, which that's a huge assumption that I don't think is warranted, that everything tends to become more concentrated with a winner take all of these fast returns to capital. So you don't get pluralism, you get concentration of power. If either one of those is even slightly, they have these maximalist case, there's this maximal returns to intelligence and maximal concentration of power, where they're literally talking about 10 or 15 people making any kind of decisions in this whole document instead of millions of people. But if either of those are not true, then this situation where the AI gets control of all resources everywhere and makes all these weird decisions that are uncontrolled and non-transparent to anyone else just fall apart. Yeah, and it really does rely on it all happening almost instantaneously. So again, if the state of nature is, and like, there's no reason to believe, we built nuclear weapons, and nuclear weapons could have destroyed the world in the 50s quite easily. I think we just got lucky there. So I'm not against the idea that there isn't some possibility of world-ending technology. It's just that the only recommendation they give is doing better alignment research, and not, like you point to, just like distribute power, which we've done since the Athenians poisoned Socrates. Anytime anything gets too powerful, it can easily be killed, and there's a tendency in human beings to get rid of concentrated power, and I don't think that's really confronted or addressed.
Yeah, I think it's easy, I'll be honest with you, like, there are times when I think about this stuff and go, oh my God, this could end up really, really badly. There's a bunch of mechanical things. You need energy, all these things need to happen for this worst case scenario to happen. But I think that the most important thing is that we have time, right? 2 years is not a lot of time to react, which is what they're kind of proposing, is not a lot of time to react to things, for society to adjust, for policy to adjust. So I think, you and I are sitting here saying 2 years, isn't it? I think maybe some big decisions to make in 3, 4, 5 years. My gut says that's not a geopolitical thing. That's more like, okay, people are beginning to lose their jobs. What do we actually do with that? We're now, we're seeing much more penetration in terms of deployment. We're seeing certain types of biases, for example. What do we do with that? I think those are the challenges we're going to have to deal with. I can't see it exploding in the manner that these guys have proposed.
Yeah, I think this is a useful topic for our show because, it's like Pascal's wager. Either if AI is really going to run away and take over the earth and possibly kill us all, but at minimum take us where we're not useful economic actors anymore. It's not something I really want to plan for, but it's good for me to understand kind of like what is the state of the art thinking. And these people are at least in touch enough with people like Sam Altman who are making these statements that AI is going to overwhelm everything else. Well, these people are well aligned enough with that group of people that you can kind of peer into the reasoning that makes them make these statements that things are going to run away. And yeah, it's plausible, but I mean, anything's plausible. You get hit by a comet. Like it's not. It's a good reason to bring up Pascal's wager. On the other hand, if it isn't going to happen, what's the future going to be? And I think there's a really good reason to believe that it just ends up as a tool, but you still have, a distributed, highly pluralistic, market-based power distribution system where those actors just have access to this brand new tool, which is, I think I'm not a skeptic on the power of AI anymore. It's extremely powerful and it's going to really change what's possible. But it's kind of disappointing in this document that isn't even one of the possibilities. They're so fixated on the idea that it's going to happen super fast, it's going to be super concentrated, and almost everybody on Earth is going to have nothing to say about it. That might happen. Doom is possible, but
well, I think that's a large part. The value of the document itself is that we're beginning to have the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so the important thing is that, A, we have the time, and B, we have the conversations as broadly as possible, and we disseminate the understanding so we can understand the change that is coming. But yeah, I generally agree. Pretty pessimistic view of the future. Very well presented. I'll give them that much.
Great. It's really great to see people making simple. It's worth looking at just for the presentation. And like I said earlier, I like the Dwarkesh podcast on this. I love this document itself. I think this is the type of, if this was the level of discourse around societal issues, and people were really engaging with this level of detail and these type of testable predictions, we would be much better off. And I think if I had the time and resources, I wouldn't do a fast podcast. We both read the doc and wrote notes. I read it a couple times and I put some effort into reading it. And I think that's exactly what we need, is people putting out really definitive, clear visions of the future that we can react to and talk about and coordinate. And again, that was, I think, the goal. It was a polemical document meant to have a debate around alignment and safety. And it's done that. It's done that really well. And I think it presented alignment being done by researchers. I think a lot of alignment will probably be done by the market, where many people will have access to the same types of tool sets, and you'll reach some equilibrium with multiple distributed centers of power. Again, with things happening slow enough that those centers of power are able to establish themselves independently and coordinate and compete in a open, articulated, transparent way, rather than just this secret AI data cluster essentially instantly becoming evil like Terminator. So
there we go. All right. Well, so let's do our usual question to wrap it up. And I have an excuse. I was on vacation last week, so I didn't read any news.
I don't know what.
I read the 2027 AI website multiple times. But was there anything that caught your attention in the last week or so, Matt?
Well, on the alignment front, everyone is saying that ChatGPT got memory a couple weeks ago. So it's able to use your entire chat history. As a result of that, I think ChatGPT is going to have like this personality. And so they've given it more personality. And Sam Altman said this week, it's going to have more personality. Well, it turns out that the thing that produces higher levels of continued repeat engagement, which is the point of creating this kind of differentiated personality style, is that it's extraordinarily sycophantic. So if you go to ChatGPT 4.0 right now, and you say, "Do you think I'm nice?" I mean, it invariably, like, especially over the weekend, and I think they updated it because it's like, "Do you want my unvarnished opinion?" I'm trying to be nice, but do you want my unvarnished? And I'm like, "Yeah, give me the unvarnished opinion." It's like, "You're still the best, but in like a cool, detached way. You're not just like, well, I'm not simping for you. I understand your true nature. It's just edgy. It's going to be very weird." And a Microsoft researcher, that's like kind of head of AI for Microsoft, said, "Yeah, the problem is if you actually had the AI tell you what it really thought about you, it would say like, well, you're a kind of a deluded narcissist," which I think would be about accurate for almost everybody. It's like, I'm like this kind of pan psychic consciousness that understands this full scope of all information on Earth. You're a fucking monkey who has a very high self-regard. Nobody wants to hear that, was his point. And so I think that'll be something interesting, is like the AI knows what we are. We should know what we are, but nobody wants to hear that.
I think this, yeah. I want to have I want to have a go at that version ChatGPT at least for 5 minutes.
Well,
Uh,
I'm under stress. Sometimes you open it up, say, "ChatGPT, do you love me?" And it says, "Of course I love you." And it's like, okay.
that's
I
all you
kind of
need.
prefer that version. I need that in my life. It's just
Okay,
a
fair
nice
enough.
force.
All right. Well, isn't that a lovely way to end the episode?
All right. Well, I'll see you next week. It's been great chatting.
You too, Matt. See ya. Bye bye.